It is a brand new backfield for the Arizona State Sun Devils this year, and Xazavien Valladay could be the biggest name back there. What's the production that he could possibly put out for the Sun Devils, though? We'll talk about that today on this edition of the Locked On Sun Devils podcast.
Are Locked On Sun Devils, your daily podcast on the Arizona State Sun Devils, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome back to the Locked On Sun Devils podcast. My name is Richie Bradshaw, and I will be your guide for everything Arizona State Sun Devils. Thank you guys so much for making us your first listen every day. Remember, we're free and available on all platforms, including YouTube, if you would like to check us out in a visual platform. Wherever you do get those podcasts, though, make sure that you hit the like and subscribe button and turn on notifications so that you get an update whenever we put out a new episode. Guys, we've started a series where we're talking about Arizona State Sun Devils and predicting their stats, not scats. I don't know what that is. We started with Emory Jones, the predicted starting quarterback. Then we went to Daniyel Ngata, one of the big running backs in this backfield. Now we're going to Xazavien Valladay, the other main running back in this backfield. Valladay, of course, being a transfer from the University of Wyoming and having a fairly productive career during his tenure there. 4 years, 3,200 rushing yards, 19 touchdowns on the ground, and another 51 catches for 584 yards and 2 more touchdowns through the air. So this is a guy who has production that backs up the ability of him to be a workhorse. We'll get into that in just a second. But the more important factor here that we're going to take a look at today, a little more in depth than what we did with Daniyel Ngata, is he has a lot of really good value as a receiver. But predicting stats, we're first going to talk about the running aspect of being a running back. So based off of his volume, in his 4 years with the Cowboys, he carried the ball 626 times, never less than 5.1 a carry. In fact, his career average was 5.2 a pop. And again, a little over 3,200 yards, a little shy of 33, I should say. Exactly 3,274 yards, tallied on 19 touchdowns in 4 seasons. One of those years actually being the COVID shortened year. A very, very productive career during his time with the Cowboys, and 2,000-yard seasons to show for it. The 2020 season, where he only played the 5 games, again, that was a COVID shortened year, he was averaging 110 rushing yards a game. So this is a guy who definitely has no problem putting up numbers in the box score, and then is very, very efficient once he actually does have those numbers to himself. So as far as taking a look at how this could turn into what he might be able to do with the Sun Devils, well, Rachaad White is gone. That's 1,000 yards right there. Jaden Daniels is gone. That's 710 yards missing. And Trayanum is gone. That's 402 yards. All of that. So 2,112 rushing yards from last year are gone. The next closest guy was Daniyel Ngata. We already went over him. And I had made the prediction that he was going to end up rushing for 700 yards for the program. Also mentioned that I said Emory Jones would rush for 700 yards. Looking at Valladay, looking at all of the production that's going to be missing, this is essentially kind of the Rachaad White role that I'm assigning him here. So my logic behind that is Jaden Daniels rushed for 700 yards. Emory Jones is coming in. He's better than Jaden as a runner. I think he replicates that 700. Daniyel Ngata and Trayanum combined for 711 yards last year. And I'm saying that Ngata can take that role and just combine those yards. Rachaad White was our 1,000-yard runner. Now, I think that Ngata could easily be a 1,000-yard runner. But as of right now, he is splitting the backfield. So he's not. The same, I will say, for Xazavien Valladay. I think Valladay could also be a 1,000-yard runner. In fact, for my high upside here, I'm saying 1,100 yards for him. 1,100 yards on the ground in a best case scenario, in my opinion. In a worst case, like lowest total I'm predicting him is 500 rushing yards. I find it really hard to fathom a situation where he just takes this dramatic step backwards in terms of production based off of what he's shown you. Like I said, in his 4 years with the Cowboys, he never had less than 5.1 a season. 4 years worth of 5.1 yards a carry or better production, 5.2 for his career. This is a guy who is a very, very good running back. So again, for my high upside 1,100 yards, I feel like I could even go a little higher. I'm not going to, because there is definitely going to be a learning curve going from, Division 3 competition to, drawing a blank, Power 5 program. There's absolutely going to be a learning curve there. And I think that that's going to it's gonna take a little bit of time to adjust for Valladay. It's not that he's incapable of doing it, but for him to go from Wyoming to Arizona State in a year and expect him to be, a 12 to 1,400 yard rusher is just it's unrealistic. It's not fair. I'm not saying he can't do it. I'm here for it. I'm certainly not going to complain if Valladay wants to come out and throw up 1,400 rushing yards. I'm not here to stop him. By all means, you do you. But as far as my predictions go, I'm going to say 800, and that is going to be ahead of Ngata, and it is going to be ahead of Jones. I think that Valladay does end up being the lead rusher for the team this year. I think that he's just the most proven running back the team has, because Deontay Elliott and Tevin White neither have significant touches whatsoever, with, obviously Tevin White being an incoming freshman, but you don't have a lot of proven talent there. Ngata is the most veteran established guy, but even then, this is a back who has less than 100 career carries. So there's not a lot of proven. I'm kind of stumbling on my words, but point is there's track record. That's what I'm looking for. There's not this definitive track record here that tells me I should be able to trust what's there the way that I look at it with Xazavien Valladay. And I'm like, yeah, this guy has 600 career carries. He has shown that he is proven. So sure, there could be a step back in terms of, if I give him 300 carries, is he going to turn it into 1,500 yards? I don't know. But I am confident if I gave him 300 carries, he could definitely turn out a 1,000-yard season for me. That's not going to be the case in a good news for him and for the program. They're not going to have to force him the ball. If they do, I think he does produce. Like I said, 1,100 rushing yards in a best case scenario is more of a reflection about how I think that Valladay can be hyper productive for you. The worst case, the 500, that's just if he doesn't translate or he just gets overshadowed in the backfield. The prediction I'm making, the 800, that's me going with the, they've got a good thing going with more than one guy. And I think that Valladay is a very important piece of that. And I think that he is probably the best piece of that. I'm a very, very big Daniyel Ngata fan. I'm really excited about Emory Jones being the mobile quarterback for the team. But I think that Valladay is still the most proven and perhaps reliable runner the team has right now. I got him leading the team with 800 yards. On the touchdown side of things, now, this is where he wasn't exactly well known to get into the end zone, including his receptions. He had 677 total touches for the Cowboys program and only scored 21 times. So this isn't something where I'm looking at him and I'm like, oh, he's going to be Rachaad White. He's going to have 16 touchdowns. I don't think that's the situation. I think a best case scenario, and this is just rushing touchdowns we're focusing on right now, I think the best case scenario here for him would be 8 touchdowns. I think a worst case would be 2. And my prediction is going to be 5. Career high for him in rushing touchdowns is 6. He did that twice, and those are both in seasons where he had 200 or more carries. I think he's going to be right around that ballpark again in that 200 carry mark. Looking at what Arizona State had last year, they didn't have one guy who sees 200 carries. Rachaad White had 182. That was the lead for the running backs. if you combine Chip and Ngata's touches from last year, they were just over 134 carries, and Jaden Daniels had 138, including sacks. So I don't think there's a guy here who's going to get 200 carries. And because Valladay is not a guy who's throwing up huge touchdown numbers on a low amount of touches, this just isn't a situation where he's going to end up leading the Pac-12 in running backs. Heck, he might not even lead Arizona State in rushing touchdowns. So not a bad thing. It's just kind of the situation where we're going to be finding ourselves as of right now with our predictions. Is I think this is going to be a guy who's going to be able to put up good numbers. I'm just not anticipating him to be in the end zone 100 different times. Let's go ahead and hop into our first break. When we return, we're going to go ahead and continue our conversation looking at the receiving side of things. We'll talk about that in just a moment on the Locked On Sun Devils podcast. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your betting needs and sports information. Find all the latest sports developments, league news, and reviews, including this year's NHL playoffs and Major League Baseball. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. And BetOnline.net remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, including MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to sign up and learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Again, thank you guys so much for making the Locked On Sun Devils your first listen every day. Remember, we're free and available on all platforms. Turn on those notifications, guys. Never miss an episode. Let's hop back into our conversation now. Looking at the receiving numbers. Now, this was an area where I was not as, what's the word? Like, not high on Ngata so much, but like I wasn't gonna sit there and predict him to be 1,000-yard receiver or a guy who was gonna catch 50 passes. That's a little bit different here with Valladay. I'm not saying he's a 1,000-yard receiver, but I am telling you, I think he's gonna get some pretty good work in the receiving game. And perhaps the biggest reason for that is because of what's going on with the Sun Devils receiving room this year. There is not a lot of continuity that is coming back, and there's a lot of opportunity here. Your top 4 guys from receptions are gone from last year. Your top 4 guys from receiving yards are gone from last year. That includes running back Rachaad White, who was second on the team in receptions and in yards. And for what it's worth, he was over 10 yards a carry while he was there as well. So this is a huge opportunity for Valladay to step in and be able to contribute some really, really noteworthy production. Emory Jones is a confident passer. He's going to need a lot of time to build a rapport with everybody else that he's working with. And in the meantime, he's going to have a really nice safety valve in Xazavien Valladay to dump the ball off to underneath. Looking at his previous production at Wyoming, 51 catches in 4 seasons, and 47 of those coming in a 3-year span, including that 5-game season that he had during 2020. This is a guy that the Cowboys were very confident in relying on out of the backfield as a receiver. And he turned it into production. Again, 11.5 yards per reception, 584 yards and 51 catches. This is a very capable receiver out of the backfield. And because of that, I think that he's going to be in a very similar situation to Rachaad White, where he could be really near the top of the team in receptions and maybe even receiving yards if he is able to continue that prowess that he has and turn stuff into just making things happen. I think that there's a lot of potential there for Valladay. Starting on the receptions, I think the absolute best case scenario here is 45. And Rachaad White had 43 last year. Remember, he didn't play 2 games. So he definitely could have easily toppled the 50 mark. Easily could have done it. I think that Valladay could be in a very similar situation. I think that Valladay is going to be the number one back in the backfield when it comes to being relied on as a receiver. And this is especially because Ngata has next to no production as a receiver. He has 5 career catches, excuse me. I double checked. He had 5 career catches coming into this season. And no one behind him has any other, proven track record better than what Ngata has. And then I look at Valladay and I'm like, yeah, no, this is the guy. So when it comes to receiving work, I anticipate he's going to get it out of the backfield. So I'm saying best case scenario is 45. Worst case, I'm quote unquote worst case here is 25. I still think this is a guy that is going to get the ball a lot through the air. My prediction here is going to be 35. I'm just going right in the middle. It would be a career high for him by a lot, considering his career high at Wyoming was 23, which was this past season in 13 games. My thinking with why I'm saying it's going to be more is because Arizona State is just going to be a team that's going to want to get as creative as they can with their running backs because it's going to be so pivotal for them to do that. It's going to be important for them to not be so vanilla when it comes to how are they going to use their running backs. Oh, Daniyel Ngata is back there. Well, it's just going to be a power set. Valladay is back there. It's going to be something more widespread. I don't know. This, that, and the other kind of thing. But if you're able to incorporate the receiving aspect that Valladay brings, now you can be a little more off balance and keep these defenses on their toes. So I think that incorporating him is going to be very important. And I think it's going to be a huge boon for the offense. I'm saying 35 catches there, and I'm going to say he turns it into 300 yards as well. Just under 10 yards. Sorry, not sorry. For the highs and lows, I'm pairing 500 receiving yards with 45 receptions in a best case scenario. That's that over 10 yards a reception mark. And that would be complete nightmare fuel for Pac-12 teams if Valladay was able to get 45 catches and turn it into almost 500 receiving yards. The low side, 25 catches turns into 150 yards. That's just, he's not able to turn it into anything significant. It's 7 yards a catch. It's pretty dang good for a running back. It's just not what we're hoping he would be able to do if he had all the volume match the production that we anticipate. So my prediction, again, I'm saying he catches it 35 times. I think he turns into 300 yards. So that's what I'm thinking for the receiving stats here. Let's go ahead and hop into our final break. When we return, we're going to go over all the total yards, the total touchdowns, and I'm just going to give you my kind of overall thought on Xazavien Valladay. This is the Locked On Sun Devils podcast. And one more time, thank you guys so much for making the Locked On Sun Devils your first listen every single day. Get more on the Locked On Pac-12 podcast by making it your second listen. Host Spencer McLaughlin and local experts of Locked On take you across the Pac-12 in 30 minutes or less. Make the Locked On Pac-12 podcast your second listen. Again, that's Locked On Pac-12. Guys, I really, really think that the Sun Devils might have something special here with Xazavien Valladay. If everything hits, taking my predictions and mashing them together here. Total yards, I said 1,100 rushing. I said 500 receiving. That's a 1,600-yard season incoming for Xazavien Valladay. That would be huge, especially when you consider that Rachaad White had 1,456 last year in 11 games. And this would be admittedly probably a 13-game season that I would be predicting these kind of numbers for Valladay. I think this is a guy who, when you give him that kind of volume, he's going to produce big time. And that would have to be the situation here for him to reach this lofty 1,600 yards. Is he wouldn't be able to have competition. There wouldn't be able to be this Daniyel Ngata part-time role. It would truly have to be a situation where Xazavien Valladay completely seizes this backfield completely for himself. Alternatively, the low that I have here would be 650 yards. I said 500 rushing was a worst case scenario. I'm saying that 150 yards is a worst case scenario, and a worst case scenario total yards would be 650. That's still not terrible from a number 2 back, but that's pretty much what it would have to be. He would have to be your number 2 back. He couldn't be in a situation where it was a 1A, 1B and put up those numbers. If he was not a 1A, 1B, which is the situation that I predict it's going to be, then 650 yards feels like a huge accomplishment. I think that Valladay is going to be productive no matter what. But the 1,600 yards to 650 yards, that's a huge gray area in between, because I'm not sure whether or not this is going to be a volatile situation for the run game. Is Valladay going to be a lead guy? If he is, then he's going to have all the yards in the world, just like what I said for Ngata. Is he going to be the number 2 back and nothing more than a number 2 back? Then set the expectations low. If he's going to be a 1A, 1B, like I think he ends up being an 1,100 total yard guy, which, again, if you go back to what I said about Ngata, it checks out. I said that both of these guys, in a best case scenario, were 1,000-yard runners. In a worst case scenario, they're getting 400 to 500 rushing yards. And in a prediction, I'm thinking that they're both sitting right about that 1,000-yard mark. I said Ngata was going to be 800 yards because he's not going to get the receiving work. I'm saying Valladay gets to 1,100 because he is going to get the receiving work, and that's going to tally on for him. As far as touchdowns go, Valladay never was a huge touchdown guy while he was with Wyoming. I don't know if that translates. Something I mentioned on the Daniyel Ngata edition was that the Sun Devils just might not be a team that scores a lot this year. It's just a reality we may have to face. And if that is the case, then, I mean, the low here could only be 3 touchdowns. The high, I'm saying 12, and that's like to the moon kind of prediction. Now, my high was 8 rushing touchdowns and low was 2 rushing touchdowns. So the 12 and the 3, that would mean that he's got 8 rushing. 8 rushing and 4 receiving in the best case scenario, and 2 rushing and 1 receiving in a worst case scenario. My final prediction, I'm going to say 8. I said my prediction was 5 rushing touchdowns. I'm going to go here and say he's got 3 more through the air as my prediction overall. I think 8 touchdowns is a very realistic season for him. He's had, a 3 touchdown, 8 touchdown, 4 touchdown, and 6 touchdown season. And that's as a full-time guy. So an 8 touchdown season would be pretty spectacular for Xazavien Valladay. It's not slander, just trying to be as realistic as I can be. But overall, looking at the numbers now, I am going to be saying that Valladay is going to be in for an 800-yard rushing season with 5 touchdowns on the ground. He's going to catch the ball 35 times, turn it into 300 more yards and 3 more touchdowns to give him an 1,100-yard scrimmage season, 8 touchdown season. I don't know. I think that Valladay is going to be a very, very good player for the Sun Devils this year. And he's going to be one of those guys who I think by the end of the year, hopefully the Pac-12 is able to say this guy gave us a really hard time and he doesn't get enough love, instead of, I don't even remember who that guy was. I'm thinking that it's going to be the former. And I think what's going to make him so good is the fact that he is in this tandem with Daniyel Ngata. I think that the two of these guys are going to dominate together. And unfortunately, it's not going to help them to cross that 1,000-yard mark or any other massive like running back milestone, but they're going to keep each other fresh. They're going to keep this offense running. And I think that Valladay and Ngata are both going to be, a 1A, 1B backfield. And I think that they're going to be the reason that the Sun Devils are able to sustain drives and keep defenses off balance in a best case scenario. That is going to go ahead and wrap up this edition of the Locked On Sun Devils podcast, though. Thank you guys so much for making us your first listen every day. Remember, we're free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. If you would like to check us out in a visual platform, but wherever you do get those podcasts, make sure that you hit the like and subscribe button and turn on those notifications so that you get an update whenever we have a new episode drop. If you are on YouTube, hello there. I hope you appreciate the new setup a little bit. Got a new mic stand and a brand new halo light to make myself nice and pretty so you guys can see everything that's going on. That is also a little indication for you guys. If you're only listening in a visual platform, go ahead and hop on YouTube and subscribe there as well. But if you want to talk to me on a more regular basis, go ahead and go to Twitter and follow me at Richie Bradshaw36 and follow the podcast while you're there as well at LO_Sun Devils. Always there, always happy to be talking with you guys about Arizona State Sun Devils football, basketball, and a little bit of everything else in between. But that is all I got for you guys today. So until next time, you keep it locked right here on Locked On Sun Devils.